Okay. Oh, here we go. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
It's so good to see everybody. Thank you for joining us in person. Thank you for joining us virtually. We have this monitor here so that Melody can actually see our virtual attendees and just be a little bit more in the same space. We're always trying to make these better. So I am Crystal Pascucci Clifford. I'm the executive director of InterMusic SF. For all of you new folks joining, I'd love to give a brief introduction to our organization and what we do. InterMusic SF is a nonprofit arts service organization, which means that our mission is to advance by supporting others, by supporting musicians and arts workers that make and celebrate and innovate small ensemble music. Founded 27 years ago, we provide three main areas of programming. SF Music Day is a free public music festival that brings together over 4,000 audience members for 7 hours of continuous music by world-class performers each year in the heart of San Francisco. SF Music Day is known for its culturally diverse programming, featuring artists from classical, jazz, world, early, new, experimental, folk traditions, and everything that crosses and becomes of those intersections. Save the date for this year's SF Music Day, October 19th. The second area of programming is our musical grant program. Since 2008, InterMusic has awarded over $1.2 million to artists in support of the production of live performances, commissions of composers for small ensemble music, album recordings and release expenses, and multidisciplinary collaborations. For our region, the musical grant program is one of very few funding sources of its kind and continues to fund groundbreaking work by Bay Area musicians. Lastly, the fiscal sponsorship program, which really folds a whole bunch of professional development services into it, is our third pillar of programming. Our fiscal sponsorships program serves 86 affiliate entities representing over 380 individual artists. Through this program, InterMusic SF provides an extension of our 501c3 tax benefit to those who do not have nonprofit status, like musicians and composers. With this, affiliates are able to apply for and receive tax-deductible donations like grants. Which leads me to this evening's program, our 2025 Professional Development Workshop Series, session number 3. Each spring, we offer in-person and virtual workshops that provide practical, usable guidance on a broad range of topics designed for professional musicians, facilitated by local experts. All workshops are free of charge. Today, we are honored to present nonprofit grant consultant Melody Hernandez as our host for this workshop, The Art of Grant Writing. Melody is a founder of Root Reach Rise Incorporated. Over the past decade, Melody has raised nearly $40 million on behalf of clients, the bulk of which represents first-time funding. Melody is a member of the Grant Professionals Association, a founding board member of the local Greater Bay Area chapter, and currently serves as president of this chapter. They are passionate about equitable access to resources and focus on organizations and communities that have historically had less access to systems of power and wealth. Without further delay, our presenter, Melody Hernandez.
All right. Thank you, Crystal. All right. So, for those of you who are joining us virtually, I am looking at you. And so, if you feel comfortable turning on your camera, that's always really helpful. I like to know exactly how much folks seem like they're able to follow along or if they get confused looks on their face, all that good stuff. So, if you don't mind turning on your camera and I can kind of get a sense of who we all have too. I'm also very happy to, this isn't just me talking at y'all. There's plenty of recorded webinars for that. This is meant to be interactive. So you can physically raise your hand or use the little raise your hand feature somewhere in that bar if you want to ask anything at any point. Or if you put things in the chat, Mark will read them aloud for everyone. Folks in the room, kind of same thing, raise your hand or, it's helpful to raise your hand just because we also have a microphone for you to use so that folks at home can hear what you're saying. So like if you raise your hand, then somebody will hand you the microphone and then that lets us know. Also, because I'm a former classroom teacher, so I'm like, yeah, raise your hand. All right, so we are going to be talking about grant work tonight. And I know it's called the art of grant writing, but also there's a lot more to grants than just the writing part. And that is the bulk of what's going to make you successful in your grant work is recognizing that you should get to the point that these grants write themselves, right? It's so much more about finding the right opportunities, building relationships with those funders, getting your program or your project ready to, submit, and then you sit down and those words just flow, right? Ideally, that's the way we do it. However, we don't live in an ideal world. So sometimes things are a little messier in practice. But Mark, if you don't mind going ahead, I have a couple slides that we're going to just kind of skim by. I think everyone's going to get a copy of this if you've signed up. I think Mark is going to send it to everyone. And we are going to, um, there we go. All right. Are we going? Okay. So yeah, so I think there's a slide that is kind of the intro, and we can kind of skip past that because I think uh, Crystal already said the nice little intro. You'll see some photos in this. The photos, all but one, are taken by me. I just like to let you know that, and I like to have folks guess which one wasn't taken by me, and you'll probably know when you see it. I also, grant folks were really punny, so a lot of times, ooh, get your ducks in a row, right? There's some kind of pun involved in there. So yeah, so we're gonna start with just kind of like getting ready, right? Little orientation, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Grants are just one way to fund your programs and projects. And I think sometimes they get a lot of attention when there's actually a lot of other ways to fund your projects. And actually a lot of nonprofits and a lot of projects like the ones that you all have don't actually get any grant funding. A lot of nonprofits use earned revenue, sponsorships, and individual donors to fund their work. And grants are not the only way. But that's what we're going to talk about today is just the grant side of things. Crystal is going to have a multi-part series on individual donors. And a lot of you probably already know about like earned revenue, like ticket sales, right? Like that is another way. But when you're looking at your project budget, you're incorporating all of these things that you're, planning to get, oftentimes multi-sources of funding for. So if you don't mind skipping ahead, Mark, we'll go to, again, we're just focusing on that. Oh, sorry, back one. So what I love about grant work, it is more than just the money. The money is what gets people excited and the money is what gets people showing up doing the work. But ultimately you're doing a whole lot of work or a whole lot of things that are included in the work. So it's all the planning and the goal setting and all the finance stuff. Grants, it encompasses everything. Grant processes are really set up with, they're not always perfect, but the idea is that they're set up to actually make your programs more impactful, right? So all the questions that they're asking you at the end of the day are really trying to help you think through things. Like when they're asking you for a budget, they're trying to say like, hey, like, did you think through all of the costs that you're going to have? Because ultimately you're probably not going to have a really successful, show if you forgot to, pay for the venue, right? Like, so it really is designed to help make sure that you have all these things in place. And that's what I love about it. And that's what I get excited about. But also it can kind of make it a lot of work because it is more, again, more than just the writing. So if you can go to the next slide, Mark, and then Yeah, there's definitely some pros and cons to grant work. Um, I like grants because they're also more bang for your buck. You know, you can write one grant and get, you know, thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. Whereas, you know, one ticket sale, that's, you know, maybe 10 bucks, 20 bucks, 50 bucks, right? So that's one thing I like about it. It also builds credibility when you're able to say, oh, this, you know, this series is, you know, brought to you by the Hewlett Foundation. Like people are like, oh, if Hewlett thinks this is great, I got to go see this, right? So it really helps kind of build that credibility. Funders can be really supportive during difficult times. So we saw this during COVID. A lot of funders were just like, here's a check for X amount of dollars. Maybe the people who usually buy a ticket to your show, I don't know if any of them like mailed you the $20 they were going to give you for a ticket, but that probably doesn't quite happen as much as with grant funding, grant funders. And so there's also oftentimes a very clear and transparent process. So like with individual donors, sometimes you're like, I don't know what to do. How do I start? With grants, like SFAC is going to say, here's the application and here's the grant guidelines or the directions for how to fill it out, right? So there's not always, but oftentimes there's can be a transparent process. But I do like to acknowledge there's some things about grants that make it difficult. It's specialized work, so it can be kind of confusing because maybe there's like different verbiage that we use. We use different language that, like, if you're not familiar with it, it can be a little confusing. It's a long game. Sometimes we're writing grants for funding that's not going to come in for 2 years. So if you have something that you need to fund now, you're doing that work and you're working to try to get this funding for the future, which it can be kind of twice as much work. There's also can be restrictions on your funding, and then there's reporting requirements. Somebody, again, like, you know, gives you, if an individual person donates money or a person buys a ticket, they don't come up to you like a month later and say, well, how many people came? And what was the age range of your attendees? But sometimes funders ask us these things. So it kind of creates more work on the back end. It can be a competitive process, which, you know, can kind of make it a little tricky for some folks. It can be an equitable. A lot of grant funding is set up to have money flow where it's already flowing. So they'll ask you things like, what, you know, how much money did you bring in last year? And we're going to use that to decide if we're going to give you money this year. Well, that's not fair. The people who got more money last year, maybe they don't, why are they getting more points for that, right? But that's the way the system can be set up sometimes. And it can definitely leave funding gaps. So a lot of times you can get a grant and it's not going to cover the full project that you're trying to do. And you have to sometimes cobble together a couple grants or figure out other revenue streams to cover it. All right, that's a lot of just kind of talking at everybody and orientating people just a little bit about some grant stuff. But I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions up till this point, or if anybody wants to make any comments about just kind of any of this like groundwork. Do people kind of have any of y'all, your experience with grants, does it kind of match some of the stuff I've said here for those of you who've already done grant work? All right. For those of you who are a little newer to grant work, I don't say any of the things I'm going to be saying tonight is not meant to scare anybody off of it, but I do believe that you should be going into this fully expecting for it to be what it is, which is, you know, it's great when you can do it right. It's also can be a lot. All right. Yes. And I saw a lot of nodding. Thank you for those of you who have your cameras on. That's always helpful. And if you don't, no shame. You know, you can, there's life. It's fine if you have it off, but it is nice to have at least some folks with their cameras on. All right. Next slide, please, Mark. All right. So the ideal grant process, again, writing is just one of these things, right? Way before you ever get to writing in an ideal world, right? You sit down and you sip your nice little latte and you plan out this program and you make this perfect budget and all the things that you need to have ready. And then once you know exactly what you're going to be doing, I have this project in mind. I'm going to, you know, do a show and it's going to have, you know, this impact on the music scene. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to find funders who want to fund exactly what I'm doing. And once I find that list of funders who's excited to fund the thing I'm doing, where I'm doing it, in the type of genre that I'm doing it in, Then I go ahead and I submit this very well-reasoned, well-crafted grant to them with all the required documentation. Get the grant, spend the money the way I'm supposed to, and report back and then ask them to fund me again, right? This is the ideal process, right? If you are privileged in a place of privilege, or if you have the resources or whatever the situation is that you could do it in this ideal process, then yes, do it in this ideal process. Ultimately, you will spend significantly fewer hours and you will have a significantly higher ROI, or like return on your investment of time, energy, and money if you're able to do it this way. But for most of us, next slide, please, Mark, it looks a lot more like this. We are running from getting ready to do a thing I'm doing tomorrow to running back to, oh, let me try to like figure out what I'm going to try to do next month and what grants are available. And maybe I'm going to try to change my project idea to match what that funder wants to be funding, right? And we're just trying to not let it all crash and burn, right? So this is often how it is and how it feels, but hopefully you're able to kind of work towards being able to do it in that way that's a little bit more under the ideal circumstances, because this leads to burnout pretty quick, either burnout or some broken stuff. And I think sometimes, as they say, like plate spinners, it's more about finding out which plates are made of glass and which ones are made of paper, right? What do I have to make sure doesn't crash and break? What can I let go a little bit, right? But yeah, so it is, it can be that if you do need to have funds coming in, and you're doing work to pay for today's bill while you're also planning on how to pay for something you want to be doing next year, then I think sometimes it's about working towards getting all of these things in place that you need to have. And then for the next grant, like pick a thing and make it a little better. And then the grant after that, pick a different thing, make that a little better, a little stronger, right? And keep kind of improving all your different things, like from your budgets to your language to everything, just kind of like continuous improvement so that you're able to try to get what you are working towards, right? And then sometimes the feedback that you get will help you make those changes that you need to make. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the picture that I did not take myself because I have 3 kids. I haven't kept a $50 bill in my hand for longer than a couple minutes in the last couple decades, right? But yes, the money is usually what gets people excited about grant work. So how do you secure that funding, right? What's going to help you win that grant? Next slide, please. Okay, so I have a couple checklists, and if we could look at the kind of just that one pager one first, Mark. So the first one is one that I've made, and it is a very simple checklist of like really just do these things and get them ready to have. And these are what I'm talking about of coming back and making them better. First, first of all, for you guys, there's usually a much longer list. If you use IMSF as a fiscal sponsor, InterMusic SF, then they have a bunch of those docs that I normally put here. And so they're on their website already. So then you can just go ahead and work on these. And actually, I should have included, because I forgot there's people who don't use you as a fiscal sponsor. So I should send you that one too to send to folks. But it's things like the 501c3 and all these things that InterMusic SF is able to provide for you. So once you have all of those documents in place, then what you all need are program budget. If you are more of an arts org and like you're working towards getting your own 501c3 and you're not an individual artist, then oftentimes you should start having some financial statements that are specific to you and your art organization that folks want to see. You should have your CV or your resume, work samples, and those are often things that folks are going to ask you to upload with the doc. Now, not everyone does, not every funder does, but these are really helpful things that a lot of funders ask for. And then these are boilerplate narratives. So short little descriptions of the history and mission and goals of your ensemble or your artwork that you're doing, recent programs and projects that you've accomplished, less in like resume format and more in like paragraph format, like maybe 2 to 3 paragraphs. Your artist statement, and bios. And those are two different things, right? Your artist statement is like your vision, and it's usually a little more esoteric, right? And your bio is more like, this is the school I went to, this is the person I studied under, this is I've performed at SF Music Day, right? Like it's just much more kind of factual information. And artist statement is a little more esoteric visions and things. The work sample description. So oftentimes they'll ask you for a work sample, and then they ask you for like a paragraph of like, what is this work sample? When was it? What does it mean to you? Why are you showing us this? They can see what it is. You don't need to say like, this is a work sample of, a video of me playing an instrument. They can see that when they watch the video. What they want to know is like, why did you choose this one, right? What is special about this one? This was, the most recent performance that I did. It was attended by, people for, from the community, just different details about what's special about that work sample. And then if you're having anything that you're like working towards evaluating, you have your evaluation methods, then this is very important. Your funding requests, like how much money are you asking for? And like, what do you need that money for? Like, in addition to just a line item budget, why do you need grant funding? Why, like a lot of musicians don't get grant funding, right? What is it that this grant funding is going to allow you to do? Is it allow you going to offer it for free? Is it going to allow you to have a lower ticket sale price? Is it going to allow you to work with some musician that has a higher price point that you couldn't work with if you didn't have this grant funding, right? Like, what is this grant funding going to do for the project specifically? And there's other things. I leave some blank lines here because sometimes folks are like, oh, I've seen 5 different grants that are specific to my type of work that they're all asking for this. This must be something, right? Like whether, it might be specific to your genre or something. And then a list of current and potential funders can be helpful for you to have so that like, okay, these are like Zellerbach is somebody that funds a lot in the Bay Area, right? And there's like kind of the usual funders that you have a list of who they are, and you should always have a list of your current funders. Meaning current usually means like anybody who's funded you in the last year or two. Like these are recent funders who've contributed. Funders like to jump on bandwagons. So if they're like, oh, Zellerbach funded you. Oh, great. Yeah, yeah. We want to fund you too. Like they did the homework. We don't need to do our homework now. We trust them. Right. So like having that list is helpful because they often ask you for a list. And even if they don't, sometimes you try to include that information if it's appropriate because that can be helpful. And then letters of support. A lot of funders will ask for letters of support, or if you're working with somebody else, a letter of commitment from those other folks. Now, this is just the bare bones, right? These are the things that you should probably have ready and continue to work on improving to start out with grants. Now, this other one, this is something to work towards. This is not one, if you don't mind going to that long form one, Mark, sorry, that one, yeah. So this is something to work towards. This is like, a colleague of mine did this for like multi-million-dollar orgs, right? But this is like pages. It's, I think, 8 pages. And you say it's either not just it's done, it's complete and available. Like, I know where this is. I don't have to dig for it. It's in my folder. Or it needs improvement. Even when it's done, it doesn't mean that it's good enough. Like I said, like you come back and you give that plate another spin, right? You put a little more effort into that area. If it does need improvement, what are the resources that I need for that improvement? So this is to show you, like with grant work, it is about constant continuous improvement, and you're rarely ever just done unless you were just trying to get grant funding for one project and then you're never doing grants again, right? But if it's something that you're hoping to have be a part of your practice or a part of your, kind of throughout the years, your funding streams, then you are kind of constantly, working to make improvements on that. All right, so I'm going to take another little pause and see if folks have questions, comments, horror stories. I love Grant's horror stories. If people want to talk about crazy things that funders have asked them for. Oh, yeah, can we get our microphone?
Wow, this is so cool. Okay, I have a question. So, in regards to finding funders, I know there's programs like GuideStar or like I guess paid subscriptions that a lot of bigger organizations I guess use their search engine to find the perfect funder. But if you don't have that, what is your best budget friendly thing, I guess?
So this is a two-part answer. So part number one of this is most libraries and universities pay for a subscription. And then if you go use their Wi-Fi, even with your own personal laptop, and you connect to their Wi-Fi, or if you use one of their on-site computers, you get to access it for free. And it's called Foundation Directory Online. And the website is Candid. And I can also send the link, Mark, to send out to everybody. And you can go on their website and it has a list of all of the universities and libraries that have the paid subscription that folks can access. So that's number one. They also have really great tutorials of how to use their system. Just a whole library of like, little videos that are like, here's how you find funders. Here's how you decide if it's a good fit and like how to physically use their website. The second answer to that, actually, I'm going to say three parts. The second answer to that is Google grants and your specific like instrument you play or genre of music, location, like grants for artists in California, right? And what you're looking for in addition to, this is kind of the third part, in addition to just a specific grant, right, is a lot of folks out there compile these. So California Arts Council on their website has a whole page that's just, here are grants that are open and available to folks who live in California, right? You can do filters to be like, it's a specific genre or sometimes a specific county. It's been a minute since I used that site. I think you can do county and genre. Do you know? County and genre, right? And then other folks do the same thing. So a lot of funders will say, hey, we're not accepting applications right now, but here's a list of other folks like us who fund the arts, right? And then another thing is to ask your colleagues, right? Ask folks who do similar work, like, hey, have you ever, gotten a grant? Do you recommend, working with that funder? And also, as you start to reach out to these funders, so I like to make a lot of comparisons about building relationships with funders is a lot like dating. But, I always say the one difference is when you go on a date, don't say like, I don't really like you, but do you have a friend, right? Like that's not usually a good tactic. With funders, it actually is. If it's like, hey, this isn't working out, you don't fund, if they're like, oh, we don't fund in California, we only fund in New York, then you can say, oh, well, what do you know of like good funders for musicians in New York, right? And they all kind of like know each other and they don't really like saying no to people often, like they kind of feel bad. So then they're like very happy, oftentimes, more than not, they're very happy to give you a recommendation, right? So like that is another great way to kind of do it. But yeah, definitely Google is a very underrated tool when it comes to finding grant opportunities. It's actually really helpful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. And one more question in the room. And if you're online, please either put your question in the chat or use the raise hand feature if there's anything that you have questions about.
Hi, I just have a question about it was on the previous checklist. There was a line item there that I didn't understand how it applied to music grants in particular, and that is evaluation methods.
So yeah, so that isn't something that usually comes up if you are asking for a funder, if you're saying, I want to put on just one small little concert, right? But the reason why I was thinking about taking that one off, and then I was like, okay, but this is why I kept it on. Because if you're a musician and you say, I want to go teach a musical grant program in a school, you need an evaluation method to say like, did those kids learn anything? Did they have a good time? Did I make them hate music? Right? Like, so there are times that depending on the type of project you're doing, that you might want to have you might need to have an evaluation method, or they might ask you about it. On a previous slide, when it talked about what grants are not free money. Like they're not just money. Like the IRS, they get to decide whether or not that's a grant, right? I don't know if you've met the IRS. They don't mess around, right? So like the IRS says to InterMusic SF, you get to fiscally sponsor these projects, but you need to make sure that they do what? And serve a charitable purpose, right? There has to be a purpose for this funding. It's not just free money. It's a purpose that helps the community. Now, sometimes that purpose is to help artists have revenue streams so that we have artists who can afford to eat, right? Like sometimes that's the purpose. We're helping out the artists with the grants, right? But sometimes the purpose of the funding is about the audience, right? It's to help the audience have an experience. How do you know whether or not they had it? Your evaluation method might be, did they clap? Right? Your evaluation method might be ticket resales. Did they come back? Yeah, yeah. So Crystal just said it's about audience numbers. Yes, that is often an evaluation method that you use. Did you sell out? Right? Did people come back? Did they, was there a standing ovation at the end? Right? Like these are the types of things that we actually do. Like you probably know whether or not you were successful when you performed, right? But now put that into words. And sometimes even when they're not asking, they do want to know this, right? So you sometimes like figure out a way to add a couple sentence. Hey, I know I'm good, right? This is how, right? Yeah. Yeah. And then sometimes you have more formal. Like I said, if it's like, teaching somebody or something, right? Yeah. All right. Anything from the question in the chat? What do we have?
Okay. Is it more effective to write a narrative in first person, our organization has accomplished, or third person, blank organization has accomplished?
Yes. Okay. So some people care a lot about this. I am not one of those people. So I often flip flop back and forth between first person and third person, depending on how much I want the funder to, so when I say our community, right, that's letting them know my client is a part of that community, right? Not the community. The community is kind of othering, right? And if you're a member of that community, you want to say our community, right? So there are times, but you have to be very clear. The reason why this is a thing is because sometimes if you're not really clear, we don't know who our is referring to, right? So if it's very clear, and usually that's because you just used, you just defined who the our is, or the us or me or we, right? And so same thing, if you're an individual artist, if it's your artist statement, that should be in first person, right? That should be, this is what we want to connect with you if we're on the review panel. Sorry, and I sometimes talk about, because I do sit on review panels specifically for arts. I've been on SFAC review panel, CAC, right? So sometimes I'm like, as a review panel, I'm going to say this, not as a consultant. But yeah, as a review panel, I want to connect with you through your artist statement, right? I want that to be personal. But then if it's a part that like your resume, a lot of times there's like kind of that language that's not really like first person. It's a little bit more like, talking about you in third person. And it gets really confusing if there's multiple people taking part, right? If you're partnering with other orgs or partnering with other musicians, that starts to get really confusing. So be really clear about who is the we, if you are going to slip that in. And I like to say, if I'm going to use first person outside of the artist narrative or artist statement, if I use first person, I try to have it be 2/3 third person and 1/3 first person, or less first person than that. Like I never let first person get more than like a third of the times that I could, right? Like I keep it down there, and usually sprinkle it in for times when it's most effective about, personalizing the work. Or if it just sounds like, I don't like to call an organization it. That just seems like weird to me, right? So if it's just not working, then we instead of it, right? We do this, not it does this, right? But then the other hand, there are people who are like super worked up about this and are like, it's a grant, never use first person. Those people almost always work for the government and almost always don't work on art grants. Those are people who work on like these multi-million-dollar like HUD grants. Those people do not want to see first person come anywhere near them. Usually artist grants, even if it's NEA, which I just am even sad to mention NEA right now, but if it's NEA, CAC, those are government grants, but they're for artists. It's usually artists who work there, and it's usually artists on the review panel. They're not super worked up about whether or not you use first or third person, as long as they understand you, right? If you use too much first person, it can come off a little bit like you're maybe not quite as much of like a entity, right? So if it is an artist grant, it makes more sense. And sometimes it's even written more like it's asking you to answer first person. If you're answering more as like an arts org, right? Or like an arts group, then, and you want to sound like more legitimizing yourself, maybe it's a bigger grant, like then use a little more third person. And that'll make you sound a little more, solidified as an entity, right? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Is there an efficient way to sort out funder idiosyncrasies, like if they support or do not support educational components, or if they consider anti-war themes to be terrorism, etc.?
Yeah. So this is where I come back to like dating advice, right? So like funders, especially when we're talking about like foundations, it's really hard to have any like blanket answer, because at the end of the day, the IRS, has a lot of stipulations about grants and nonprofits, and that you have to prove that it's a charitable purpose and all this stuff. But your decision making process, they basically are like, have fun with that. And you can do whatever you want. You could say, you need to come to my house at midnight and do a dance in my front lawn. And I'm the best dancer, I'm giving the money to. I don't know that the IRS would tell you you can't do that. I think they'd say, okay, do it, right? They get to choose, right? So because of that, there's no rule that you have to tell us what made you decide. So, and then the other way this is like, it's kind of like dating apps, like, right, where you're like reading somebody's profile and then you meet them and you're like, who wrote that profile? Because like, you're not anything like that person. You said you wanted a relationship. You obviously don't. Funders are like that. They put stuff on their website and then you look at who they really funded and you're like, this, what you're saying doesn't match what you're doing. And they can do that, right? And I often say too, like, again, like dating, like Tinder profiles, sometimes folks think they're being clear because they grew up in a certain environment. Maybe they're from a community that's different than yours, and what when they say this in their community it means one thing and in your community it means something different. Or maybe they just think, oh, we're supposed to say this on the profile, but everybody knows we don't mean it, right? Funders are kind of like that, and sometimes people just aren't very self-aware, and they think they're actually working towards equity. They really think they are. And then you look at what they're doing and you're like, this is not jiving, right? So there's a lot of reasons why it is really challenging to try to kind of look at, and there's no mass way to sort that. You kind of do have to look case by case. If they have a website, great. I think the current statistic is only 10% of foundations have a website. 90% don't. So how do we know about them? They legally have to make their 990s, their tax forms, public. So we can look at who they gave to, usually 2 years ago and anything before that, because it just takes the IRS forever to process stuff. So you can see who they gave 2 years ago. And you're like, again, like a dating profile, I can look at your past history and let's see if you really want a serious relationship or not, right? But maybe you changed. Maybe this year you really do, right? And funders are the same way. Maybe previously they gave to something and this year they're like, actually, we're giving to something else, which is why you want to actually get to know them. Just like when you're meeting somebody on Tinder, you show up at the restaurant, you sit down and have a meal. That's going to tell me a whole lot more than what your bio told me, right? And so same thing with funders, interact with them, right? How do you interact with a funder? If they're out there, Zellerbach again is another one that comes up a lot in the local artistic community. They have webinars. They Margot goes to stuff, right? You can meet her and talk to her. You can call her, you can email her, right? And get to know them that way. If they're doing webinars and things, or they're putting out press statements, read those and see what they're saying. And does that jive with your value system? Does that seem like somebody who's on the same page as you? Are you raising your hand or stretching? I get involved. How do you date somebody who's not on Tinder? Yeah, if you see them in a grocery store, you might go up and be like, hey, how's it going? It's kind of like that with funders. If they're not out there, It might be for a reason, right? It might be because they're not interested, right? If they're interested. So some of these really expensive paid databases that you're talking about, I mean, some of them are like insane. Some of them are like 25,000 a year, like insane expensive, right? But they will take all this data and like present it to you in different ways. So some of these more expensive ones will tell you something that's called what percent of their funding goes to first-time grantees. And when I had a client who actually paid the insane price, I was like, sweet, I get to see all this without paying for it. It's surprising how many funders, 90% of more of their funding goes to these same orgs every single year. Don't waste your time, right? Like, don't waste your time on that. If you ever happen to meet them at a dinner party and it happened to really click, or they keep, the nice thing about being public facing stuff like art is sometimes they actually just come to your show and they're like, come up to you afterwards. They're like, oh, my family has a foundation. We'd like to give you money, right? Like that's the dream, right? The dream is it just comes to you, right? And that does happen. But other than that, they're not interested usually, right? If you're looking at that level of data, if you're able to get to it, it's generally a situation where sometimes it's actually legally restricted. So if somebody dies and they leave a foundation behind with their money, it might say in their will, this money is to be given to the SF Symphony. And that's it. And legally, the person who writes the check is only legally allowed to write it to the SF Symphony, right? They can't just decide. It's not really they're not in a position to decide that, right? So yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
Well, quick technical one. Where do you find the 990s?
Oh, the 990s. If you Google the funder and their and 990, there's tons of websites. But the one I like is actually called Candid. Candid is the same company that owns the Foundation Directory Online, which is the one I said you could access from free at schools and things. So if you have to make an account, but it's a free account. And you can access a lot of information on Candid. But usually if you just Google the foundation, another one is ProPublica, has 990s. And that one you don't even have to make a free account for, but it's the information they give you is a little more basic. Candid will give you a little more information. Just use a throwaway email when you sign up, or they don't do anything with you, it's fine. But like, if you don't want to get emails from them, you can just use like like I have a Hotmail that's for that purpose, right? But yeah, as soon as you're logged in, you can get access on Candid, but there's a few of them.
And then is it worth reaching out to someone on the branding committee and seeing if they are open to a conversation? Is that okay? Or inviting them to one of our performances?
Yes. Is it always going to be successful? No, but I like inviting folks to come. And yeah, I think that, sorry.
Granting committee, not branding. My bad.
Okay, I assume that's the word. But yeah, that's definitely you can definitely invite folks to come. And everything. I think part of it is that, again, kind of back to it's relationship building. It shouldn't be transactional, right? So again, like kind of like going out on a first date, if you're just trying to get into somebody's pants, it's pretty obvious, right? You're going to be much more successful if you're really actually trying to get to know them and like interested in them as a human being. And not just like, come to my show because I want to get money from you, right? Like, so just go into it with that. Go into it with a little bit more of an idea that this is a human being that you're interacting with, connect with them as a person, and they probably have a lot more to offer you than just a paycheck, right? They can offer you, friendship, they can offer you companionship, but they can also offer you connections to other people. They can offer you advice about what you would need to do before, so that you don't waste hours writing a proposal that's not going to get funded. Because they might tell you something like, we're not going to fund you until you can at least get 100 people at a show, right? And if you're not at that level yet, like wait till you're at that level. They just saved you hours of time by giving you that little bit of information, right? So go into it as though like, I'm going to connect with this person as a human being more than just, I'm trying to get you to like me and so that you give me money, right? And they also are usually pretty busy, so like, because a lot of times they actually try to go to a lot of their current grant stuff, the stuff that they're currently funding. So sometimes those folks, their schedules get pretty packed. All right, can we go back to the presentation? All right, so we are still not even to the grant writing part. So you can see this is usually how I spend my day, right? Like I don't get to write nearly as much as I would like to. But when we are getting closer to the grant writing part, here's the grant advice. Do you, or this is still about like making sure that you're all of this is, it's different stages of the process, I should say. So do you fit the opportunity? Okay. Are you eligible is the first thing you're going to ask yourself. Now, eligibility is firm, right? That is like, these are the requirements that you have to have before we will even consider you. So if you, as somebody who sat on the other side of the table and like helped disperse grant funding and help score grants, right? It's a multi-step process, right? And there's generally somebody who first, even before they read the proposal, they go through and they say, is this person eligible, right? So I worked with a local realty firm that they had a little grants program and their employees nominated you and you could submit a grant and then they would give you, $5,000, right, for the winners. There was two requirements. One of them was that the project had to be in San Francisco. The second one was you had to be nominated by employee. Every year they would get a project from San Diego or from somewhere else that wasn't San Francisco. We didn't read that. We didn't score that. The person who collects those applications, who doesn't read or score them, sends them a letter that politely says, we did not fund you because you're not eligible. So no matter how persuasive you are, some people think I'm that good that I'm going to convince these people to fund me. If you don't meet the requirements, nobody's going to read it. You can't. And sometimes there's even, if it's government funding, California Arts Council legally can't fund you if you're in Kansas, right? Like they have to fund California stuff. That's the law. Like the legislature people are like, no, you can only fund in California, right? So be clear about, are you eligible? Do not waste your time if you're not eligible, unless there's one exception to that. And that's like, you've called there and they've said, yeah, it's okay. And there's like an example of this. So Silicon Valley Community Foundation, to even get to the application, they ask you, does 50% or more of your work happen in our counties, right? The what is it? San Clara, San Mateo. And you have to say yes to that to get to the application. And they ask a client of mine, hey, we like your program. We want you to do it down here. Fill out an application. We're going to give you money. And I started filling this out. And I said, well, wait, if I say no to this, I can't even get to the application. So we called the program officer and we're like, what are we supposed to do? Because our work is up here, but you want us to come down there and do the work. And the program officer said, just say yes. And we were like, okay. And we said yes. They're like, we know that more than 50% of your work is not in here, but we want to give you money. If they tell you that, if they say those words, do it anyways, we want to give you money, that's the only time that you want to not meet the requirements and still submit. But beyond that, are you competitive? So just because you're eligible doesn't mean it's worth your time. Right? So it's kind of like, we used to do those like BuzzFeed things and like, okay, you get like those quizzes where they're like, okay, give yourself a 1 if you've ever eaten jalapeno pepper, and give yourself a 2 if you've ever eaten and then at the end you add up your points and it tells you like, oh, you're a foodie, you're a food adventurer, right? Think of it that way, right? And it's like, if you're a really good fit, give yourself like 5 points for that thing. Right? And what are the things? The things are like, do they fund in your geographic location? If I find a funder that is only ever once given a grant in California, and I'm asking for money for a client that's based in California, and all of the other funding that they've given has been in New York City, that's not a great fit. But that's not necessarily going to discourage me because they have given in California, right? So it's not that they don't, it's that it's unlikely. So I might give it a 1 for that. Right? But then if we're 5s for everything else, well, if you add that all up and even it out, you're still a good fit, right? So geographic location, funders see a huge difference between Northern California and Southern California, right? So if they fund in California, make sure it's not all in LA, right? They have to at least once funded in Northern California if you're California based, right? And then, so geographic location, the size that you are, the stage of your career, do they only ever fund like established artists, legacy artists, you know, or are they funding folks who are more at my level, right? So size, location, the genre of music that you play. You also made a good point about education, or something. Was that somebody on the call? Sorry, that was somebody on the chat said something about if it's funding for education or if it's funding for like performances, right? All of these things. How closely am I aligned on all of these, and on a scale of kind of 1 to 5, and to get a sense, you'll get better and better at this over time, right? Is it mutually beneficial? Funders, especially like when you have program officers. So there's different types of funders, right? There's just insanely rich people. Like there's just people who have too much money. They have so much money, they're like throwing it away, right? Like that's like, there's those level of funders. Then there's funders who are like, they're program officers. It is their job. They're probably making, you know, like minimal, or like not minimum wage, but like middle income, right? Like they're struggling in the Bay Area to pay their rent sometimes, you know, to have this mission driven work of I'm trying to do good in the community, right? They're trying to do good in the community. But everybody's definition of good is not the same, right? So make sure you're on the same page. What is the good that they're trying to do in the community? Does it match what you're trying to do? And sometimes, again, with music, sometimes the good they're trying to do is to support artists. Well, is it artists like me, right? Is it artists that I fit that image, right? Or is it about what I'm putting out there, and they're trying to get audiences access to what I'm putting out there? Is it about me or about the artist, right? When in doubt, ask, because again, they are not always very good at making this clear. They think they are, they're not always great. Are well planned. So winning grant, you want to have your project idea really fully planned out. If you have a lot of question marks or a lot of TBDs, it's not going to be very competitive, right? You can maybe have one TBD. Like it's okay if maybe the venue isn't fully confirmed, but I've narrowed it down to these couple options or something. Or with your money, I can afford to go out and find the venue, right? You know, but they also want to know that you did enough homework that, you know, this money is going to get me the venue. Or, you know, things like that. Or if it's like, if you're doing an ensemble and you're like, well, to do this, we actually need a saxophonist, but we don't have one lined up, you know, but we have the rest of the group lined up, and this is the process we're going to do to find that musician, right? Do you have a full budget for everything you're trying to do, as well as how you're going to spend those specific dollars? Because it's very rare that the grant is going to fund everything. Usually you're going to have some holes that you're going to have to plug with some additional funding. And I mean, I say very rare. I mean, I think it's common. It's common that, you know, in my world it's rare, but for other folks, maybe not so much. It depends. And so first plan out the program and then answer the questions is going to be much more successful. If you're always trying to answer the questions, like to build that out by answering their questions, you end up with this like Frankenstein of a project. You know, it's not really what you want to be doing at the end of the day. And then they give you money, and then you're like, oh shit, I got to do this thing. And I don't really want to, right? Because I said what I wanted them to hear. Also, usually it's not really persuasive. You can kind of tell as a review person that this isn't fully thought out. There's holes here because they just went through and answered the questions, and I don't get a sense of the full project, right? Finally, answer the question. The number of grant proposals I have read where people just don't answer the question. They don't answer the question. You're like, when is this going to happen? And they tell you where, right? Or like, why are you doing this? And they tell you how, right? But the problem is because a lot of times the funders, they're not great at asking questions. It rarely ever says, when will this happen? Or how will this happen? It's some big, long 3-part sentence with all these commas and hyphens, and you don't really know what they're asking. So take more time than you think you need, and like ask somebody else. Like, I think they're asked, like Chris and I do this all the time. Like, do you think they're asking for this or this, right? It's not clear always what they're asking for. So like, and if you don't know, again, ask. You know, the more that people are like, what do you mean by this? The more they're going to actually like make it a better application in future years too, right? And then create a language bank. Have really good answers that you use when you're answering the next grant, like when you're filling out the next grant, so that you're not always having to start from scratch, right? All right. Next one, please. Oh, sorry.
So yeah, there's Do funders have a preference for receiving applications from grant writing reps or from the artists themselves, assuming the artist is capable of addressing the requirements and questions?
Like most questions that have to do with funders, the answer is it depends. And again, this is where we come back to the dating analogy. If you said, do most people want to date to get married, or do most people want to date just to have a good time? Well, like, yeah, people want to do one and other people want to do the other, right? Every funder is different. And they try to be clear about that though. But the best way, I think, when it comes to, are they more interested in individual artists or more like established orgs kind of thing? It's like, do they call it an artist grant? Because sometimes they'll call it an artist grant. You still need a fiscal sponsor, right? Like it still needs to go through. But like they'll usually call it an artist grant when they want to be funding the artist. Most grants are not, I don't know, I say a lot of like most and many, but I think a lot of grants are not geared towards artists specifically and are more geared towards orgs. I think, and you've probably like felt a little bit of that too, that it's kind of hard to find artist specific grants. They're a little more rare and they're often are much more labeled as like artist grants.
And there was one prior to this, and I think that going into this and from what you just said might be appropriate. Can you talk a little bit about fiscal sponsors and what are the current state requirements?
Yeah. Okay. So fiscal sponsors. Fiscal sponsors, there's a different types of fiscal sponsors. There's fiscal sponsors. Okay, so I'm trying to think how much detail do we want to go into here? So because again, the IRS monitors grant funding, because you have to remember like grants and being a nonprofit, right? This is like a lot of this is about like having this money kind of bypass taxes, right? And the IRS wants their taxes. So you have to really prove that there's a reason why the government is better off, that you're giving this money directly to somebody and they don't get their tax money from it, right? And that's what it's really about. Like by going through a fiscal sponsor, the fiscal sponsor is saying, we are ensuring that all of these projects provide a community benefit. And the government is better off that we're doing this work than having to like put everybody on, public benefits that are slowly disappearing from our society. So that is, I like kind of what the whole thing is here is that you need a fiscal sponsor for it to be like something that the IRS doesn't want to get all up and involved in, right? And the fiscal sponsor is having to do all that work with the IRS. In order to kind of continuously prove that they're, creating this positive work in the community. So that being said, like, the reason why a lot of times you just use a fiscal sponsor because it needs to go through a 501c3 for the IRS to be able to say, okay, that qualifies as not having to be taxed. And so as far as state requirements for fiscal sponsors, I mean, like a fiscal sponsor has to be a 501c3, meaning or not always 501c3, but usually a nonprofit designated by the IRS as a nonprofit in order to be a fiscal sponsor. The state also has requirements for all nonprofits, not just fiscal sponsors, but a fiscal sponsor, go ahead. Yes. Yes. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. So basically, your fiscal sponsor has to be in compliance with the state in the same way that any other nonprofit has to be. I don't think the state has any additional expectation of a fiscal sponsor. Okay, so that's correct. Crystal told me I'm correct. But that being said, if you are going to use a fiscal sponsor, you have to make sure they're in good standing with the state, which is several things. I have a whole multi-part spreadsheet that's all about nonprofit compliance. So like there's a lot of things they have to do. But number one, I think one that's gotten a lot of news locally is you have to check with the California State Registry of Charitable Trusts to make sure that whoever you're using as a fiscal sponsor is in good standing. Or the city of San Francisco will not give them money, because that is basically like the state's version of like being a nonprofit, right? Like being able to be a nonprofit in the state. So that's might be what you're thinking about. I'm not sure if there's anything else in other states. I think most folks are from California in the chat. Are we all California based here? Or are we thinking of other states? I can't really speak to any other states. But yeah, that's basically the kind of short answer of that. And I'm sorry, folks probably didn't hear on the call what Crystal had said earlier. And what she had said was, and this is important, I think, basically any nonprofit can be a fiscal sponsor. Most don't want to because, again, they are risking their status as a nonprofit if your project ends up not being, compliant. So a lot of them will be like, no, I don't want to take that risk, right? So there are usually, most often, most commonly, you will have organizations that are set up for fiscal sponsorship, or you'll have nonprofits that do not fiscally sponsor and they just do their own thing. And it's not very common for a nonprofit that's kind of doing their own thing to be like, yeah, sure, I'll fiscally sponsor you. It happens every once in a while. It's not always the most common. Usually it's like, this org is a fiscal sponsor there. Also, really quick, and Crystal, I see your hand up, but really quick, there is fiscal sponsor directory. If you Google those words, I think it's literally fiscalsponsordirectory.com or .org or something, has a whole list of fiscal sponsors. But of course, just use InterMusic SF. Go ahead, Crystal, did you have something to add?
I'm good. Like you were, sorry. I just wanted to add something that to what Melody was saying is that foundations, to meet their required amount of philanthropic giving for the year on their earnings from the foundation, they have to give that money to 501c3 organizations. They're also nonprofits. And so any earned income, there's a percentage that's required that they give away on that earned income of the foundation. So that's the reason why they can't give directly to artists, because they're not 501c3s.
Oh, sorry. They can. It doesn't count towards.
Right, exactly.
They can.
Yeah.
So you sometimes do see that they are giving out grants to artists, and it doesn't have to go through a fiscal sponsor. And it's because they're willing to basically do it in a way that they end up getting taxed on it.
Or it's in the case of the musical grant program where we get foundational support from the Heller Foundation, and for purposes of re-granting so re-granting would be like New Music USA, like Theater Bay Area. So and us, we're granting money to individuals that don't have that status because we're re-granting. We're not foundation. So
yes, exactly. But it has to have been given to you to then get re-granted out, because it's the check that they wrote to you that is technically what's getting written off. Right. But I have seen, and this isn't super common, but it did happen quite a bit during the first year of the pandemic, that some foundations were like, we're going to just write some y'all a check and we're going to take the financial hit on it. They take a little financial hit on it. I don't know how much, but they do. Okay. So we talked already a little bit about finding grants. So this is something to consider. Again, geographic scope. This is like, again, scale of 1 to 5 for these things, right? As long as you meet the requirements, then look at geographic scope. If they have a preference for an area versus not, scale of 1 to 5. How much are they funding in my neighborhood? How much are they funding in my city? How much are they funding in my county? How much are they funding in my state, right? Area of focus, such as like music versus dance. They might say on their thing, we give to all these disciplines. And then you look at who they give to and you're like, okay, but like 90% of this is going to visual arts, right? And then the 10% is split up amongst like 10 different types of art disciplines, right? Whereas then you have other ones like the musical grant program that is like, this is all about music. That's going to be a much better fit for you, right? If you're a musician. Previous giving, the size and types, are they giving to just like SF Symphony? Because when you use these tools that we were talking about, the databases, you're saying like, who gives to music, right? Who gives to music in the Bay Area? And what are you going to see? SF Symphony, you're going to see, the big names, right? If that's only ever who they give to, might not be a good fit for a smaller musician that's not, in that same line. Right. their funding guidelines, and that's usually like, if they have them, that's like their like kind of directions for their grant or whatever. And then common connections, because if you know a board member and they've come to your show and they love your music, like, and they're like, we want to fund you, like, none of this other stuff even matters at that point, because they get to decide. And sometimes, actually, a lot of folks don't know this. A lot of foundations, if you sit on the board of a foundation, you just get to choose, like, however many, you get however many dollars each year that you get to give to whatever nonprofit, regardless of what the topic is. So if the foundation gives mainly to hospitals, but you're a board member, you might get $10,000 that you can give to whatever you want. Well, I say whatever, but like, they won't let you give it to terrorists, right? Like, it has to be within reason, right? They still have to approve it, but basically you get to choose. Do I want to get to give it to my kid's PTA? Do I want to give it to my favorite musician? Do I want to give it to, and they just get to choose. And that, because they're not getting, oftentimes they're not getting paid to be on that board. That's kind of like an incentive that they get for the time and energy that they're putting into this work, right? And of course, program officers, people who work at the foundation, right? Okay, next one. Okay, vetting opportunities, national opportunities are highly competitive. You are probably, 10% is like, that's at the high end. Some of these you look at and they give to 0.02% of applications get funded, right? I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying either bring your A+ game or don't waste your time, and don't put all your eggs in that basket, right? Because it's highly competitive. And if you get it, you tell everybody and your mother that you got that grant, because that is huge, right? Again, eligibility is firm. Unless you hear otherwise, do not apply until you meet all the eligibility criteria. Spending a little time up front to vet opportunities will save you hours in the long run. So really take that time to make sure it's a good fit. Filling out a grant application can be 4, 6, 8, 12, 40 hours, right? Save yourself that time by reading a little further to say, oh yeah, actually this isn't a good fit. You just got all those hours back. All right, next one. I do want to make sure that we talk, again, this is what we actually talked about earlier. Google search, these paid directories, look at who funds similar artists and similar projects, right? If you get the little brochure when you sit down to watch a show, look on the back, who's been funding this? If you look at these brochures out there from the SF Music Day, they're going to have who funded it. It's going to be right on there, right? And then when it's similar to you, similar size, similar scope, check it out. Next one. All right. Building relationships with funders. All of the correspondence you have with them, every phone call, email, any grant proposal you give them, all of it is building a relationship. Sometimes the first step in the relationship is to submit a proposal. Then they tell you yes or no. Then you can hopefully reach out to them and say, why? Why was it a yes or no, right? And can we hop on a call and talk about, right? Sometimes that's the first step. For some of these funders that don't have a website, don't have this or that. Sometimes they will send you something saying, I'm sorry, we don't fund music anymore. Okay, good. Now that was communication, that was clear. I can move on, right? Meet funders in the wild at events, at the similar, types of work that you do. So like, stuff that's related to, meaning like if you, are working within like an indigenous music, go to those kind of events and keep an eye out for funders, because those are the ones that are interested in that same type of music, right? Common connections, they don't have to be close. It could be, I went to college with this person and their cousin works at this foundation, or if you say, hey, I called over to Zellerbach and they recommended me to call over to you, like that's a way to kind of build that rapport with them, right? But then you have to ask Zellerbach, who should I call, right? Be honest and share successes and struggles, right? Don't always go to, oh, woe is me, I can't pay my rent. You want to be honest, but also share, like, get them excited about what you're doing. And then also be honest, like, say, hey, like, this is a reason why I'm asking you for money, right? And then also listen. My favorite thing to do is to call a funder. That's a lie. That's not my favorite thing to do. I stop myself right there. When I'm calling a funder, my favorite approach to do is to call over there and say, I'd love to tell you a little bit about some work we're doing and whether or not it aligns with your funding priorities. and then I tell them 1 or 2 sentences, and then the rest of the call is getting them to say as much as possible. I prefer a phone call because people will say things that they don't put in writing. And if you're able to get them on the phone, get them talking. They will tell you so many things that they would never be on the website, right? You know? Like the president of the board, their dad once like got hit on the head with a saxophone, so he'll say no if you play the saxophone. Right? Like, he'll tell you all kinds of weird things, like that. You're like, okay, like now I know to don't talk about the saxophone in that. But anyways, okay. So next one, I think. When you're actually writing, again, this is some of the few writing advice I have because so much more is about the relationship building, about getting ready, all that stuff. But when you're writing, again, answer the question. This is on here multiple times for a reason. People don't answer questions. Keep your writing simple, clean, and passionate. It's all about the bottom one, content over form, right? You want to make it sound good. This is art, right? It's art at the end of the day, but give me the information and make sure that information is there before you make it sound good, right? I've been on panels where we funded projects that were just very statement of fact, but they gave us the information we were looking for. And I've had ones that you're like, God, that sounds beautiful. I don't get it. What are they doing? Right. And then it's hard for us to fund that. Right. So like make sure it's clean and straightforward writing and has the information that they're looking for. A lot of your answers might be somewhere already. If you have a website, if you have an Instagram, all these things, you probably have a lot of this stuff already, right? You might have an artist statement on your website. Maybe you don't call it an artist statement, but that's what it is, right? Like, I hope you all have artist statements. If you don't, do you guys do a workshop on that? Okay, perfect. Perfect. That's something that all y'all need to have. Recycle your great language and rework. Again, this is kind of like coming back to that plate and spinning it again. Rework language that you're like, I don't love that. Like I wrote it because I needed to get the grant in and it was due in an hour, but next time I'm gonna make it better. And then just like rework that, but reuse as much as you can of things that you already have. And that will help you be able to get these in. All right, next one. All right, so a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, this picture here, my son is 23 years old. He helps me make my presentations. And I said, hey, I'm doing a presentation for a bunch of musicians. Go through my photos and find some of my photos that I just took when I went to jazz night. And he said, right away, I know which one I'm going to use. And I said, you're going to use the one of that woman in the audience, aren't you? And he said, yes, because he loves this woman. He doesn't know her, but he's like, I want to know her. This is the coolest woman I've ever met in my life. I said, okay, you can put it in, but I need a picture of an actual musician. So the next one is of an actual musician. So a picture's worth 1,000 words. You know, I can talk about what's happening in the scene, but when you see it yourself, it brings it to life. But because you guys are musicians, next one, a video is worth 1,000,000 words. I was on a review panel not that long ago, and somebody was submitting for dance, and they gave us stills. And I'm like, interesting, but you know, there was 3 different work samples. Third one's a video. Great. I clicked on it. It was a video of a bunch of stills, like one of those montage ones. This is dance. How do I can't get the sense of the dance when you're just showing me a bunch of still videos, right? So so you can see this footage of this person, or the still of this person, but if we go to the video, I mean, do we know if this person, if we like the way they play or not, or you know what we think of them as an actual musician by seeing it? So we should have some music that will let us know what we're funding. So what do we think? Was that a different experience? This is a very dark video. I didn't have my lighting right? But now I know what his music sounds like and whether or not I'm into it, right? So when you're giving work samples, they don't all have to be audio or video, but make sure at least some, and hopefully most, are your actual music, right? That is much more impressive than a great photo, right? For the type of work that you're doing. It's going to be experienced differently. All right, next one. Oh, I think that was the wrong way. Okay. Oh, maybe it just was a double. Sorry, I think that got moved. Okay, next one. So budgets. A budget is a plan. And the funders are often checking for, did you plan for everything? Are your costs reasonable? Did you follow all the guidelines and include only allowable costs? Are you compensating artists' work fairly? This bottom one, make sure you find out if the review panel is artists or not, because artists are going to look at that budget a whole lot differently. And let me tell you, I've been on the review panel. I have not ever received, compensation as an artist. And so I usually get chosen to be on review panels for my grant experience. And I'm usually the only person on there who's not a working artist, right? And let me tell you, they don't care about anything else. They're looking at how much are they paying their artists, right? So, again, like SFAC, CAC, they are very open that they use artists on their review panel. Those artists care. They want to see artists in the budget, and they want to see that you're paying them fairly. I almost always hear from those folks that they scored lower because the artists weren't paid enough. So sometimes folks are like, ooh, this is a grant. I want to show I'm being fiscally responsible with the money. But that's not true if it's artists who are looking to see if you're compensating your artists fairly. So maybe if you're only using a certain percentage of that grant to pay for those artists, be clear that maybe they're getting, and they're also going to get some of the ticket sales or something, right? You're one of the artists. Make sure you're paying yourself out of that grant fairly for the amount of time. So really figure out how much time it's going to take you and compensate yourself fairly. And there are calculators for that. They often don't work in the Bay Area because they'll be like, oh, $17.50 an hour is fair. No, it's not, like that's like national stuff. So like, try to make sure it's appropriate for the geographic area too that you're talking about, right? Bay Area is a lot more expensive than sometimes even, I remember one time I was in California Arts Council and it came from like one of these tiny little counties and they were paying like, $1,000 for artists to do something other, and we're all looking at each other, is that good money there? Like none of us knew. We were like, can we Google like if that's a fair wage in that county, right? But if it's Bay Area, it's, they expect that you're getting paid a decent amount. Next one. All right, so then this last part is about managing the funding. So once you get the funding, you're not done yet, now this is when the work really starts. So there's oftentimes, next one, there's a lot of times you got the grant, great, it's super exciting. There's tons of paperwork that has to happen. And again, if this is a grant, it is going to have a lot of legal compliance. Even if it's re-granted, you guys have to prove that you gave out that money appropriately to the person who gave you the grant that you're re-granting out, right? So there's always all of this like grant compliance and management. If somebody ever gives you a grant and you're not doing a bunch of paperwork, I'd want to know what's going on. Either it got lost in the mail and you're going to get in trouble later, or there's something shady going on here, because it should legally come with tons of paperwork. So you do all this grant paperwork, then you have this grant compliance and management stage. And if you work with a fiscal sponsor like InterMusic SF, they're going to help you with this. But this is like, I need to track my invoices and expenses, put them all somewhere. Usually it's in digital format now. So they have all these great apps that like, if you're paying for something, take a pic of that receipt and put it somewhere. Try to keep that physical receipt too, but very minimum, like take a picture of the receipt and store it somewhere, because oftentimes this is the type of stuff that you have to submit at some point to kind of show that you spent the funds the way that you were supposed to spend them. If it's government, it's going to be even more so. And you might have a program officer that you're arguing with to try to get your check because they're like, well, this, like City of San Francisco, it's like, oh, you gave us a receipt for $1,000, but there was one bottle of, bottled water on that receipt. So now you don't get reimbursed, so like, make sure you understand all the things that you're allowed to submit, the format they want it in, the types of things you're going to be expecting. And then throughout that, you're letting them know each step of the way. Tell them about any problems you have as you're going through it, right? Don't wait until the end of the grant period and say, oh, I wasn't able to actually do that because this thing happened 6 months ago. Tell them at the time, and then sometimes they can help you. Like I've had it happen that venues have fallen through and funders have been like, oh, we'll help you find a new venue, right? We have a venue you can use, right? I've had it happen that they'll give you extra money to help handle whatever situation has come up. Tons of things that funders will do. They can't do it if it's too late now, and it should have happened 6 months ago. So if you're having really a hard time doing what you said you were going to do, make sure you're reaching out to the funder and checking in, right? And then maintain that relationship. You don't always have to wait for them to reach out to you. You can reach out to them. If you have an email, hey, quick check-in, just wanted to let you know that, yeah, we got the contract signed with the venue, we're good to go, and, whatever it is, right? And, of course, the event is happening, here's when and where it is, right? And offer them, to come see the show, whether or not you're giving them a free ticket or not, but just like let them know it's happening, right? And keep that relationship going well. A lot of funders do like to continue to fund the same groups, once they're kind of in with them. Not all, some of them are one and done, but a lot of them do. All right, next one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How do you know if you need to get them to sign off on a change in some aspect of the program?
By asking them. So if there is a change, sometimes they'll tell you up front, read all the paperwork they send you, right? Usually there's a section that's called, if you need to make changes, do so this way, right? If it's not clear, then, or maybe you can't at that moment in time find the paperwork or something, reach out to them. Always make sure that you like have their contact saved somewhere, like, so that you can easily reach out to them. Almost always, I would say, the grant agreement that you have to sign will tell you what is the email or phone number you're supposed to use to communicate about that grant or whatever it is. And then reach out to that contact and ask them, hey, we've had a minor change and I'm just curious, at what level do you guys want to get involved? If, and then also, look at the paperwork that they give you. And a lot of times it'll have like, this is what, so for example, Zellerbach, when they actually give you a grant, it is technically an unrestricted grant and you are allowed to use it differently than what you said you were going to upfront. But it still is good to let them know. They aren't going to make you redo anything, but it's just good to give them a little heads up. Right? But technically you are allowed to use their grants because they're unrestricted. Now, this is a change they just made a couple of years ago, that they give them to you intentionally unrestricted, so that since the pandemic, things have just been really hard to like guarantee you can do something a year later. So they've done that. So just double check the paperwork, and then when in doubt, ask. I used to feel like, before I sat on the funder side of the table, I used to feel like, oh my God, they probably get so many calls and phone calls, I don't want to bother them. And then like when I sat on that side of the table, I remember I cleared off like 2 weeks of my schedule when the grant opened, because I'm like, everybody's going to be calling me. I got one phone call. I put my phone number everywhere to call me, and I got one phone call. And then I read all these proposals and I'm like, I wish y'all would have called me, right? And then even the folks that got the money, very rarely would they reach out to me. I would reach out to them and say, hey, just checking in, everything good, right? Because I was like, I know what it's like to be on your side of the table. I want to make sure that you feel comfortable reaching out to me. But yeah, they oftentimes wish that folks would reach out to them more rather than less. Yep, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, so I think we're done with this formal part. The rest of it is, lots of stuff I touched on already with relationship building and things, but we are sending this out so folks can kind of look through the rest of it. But yeah, I'm really happy to take any more Q&As that folks have.
Yeah, I got it. Stand by. How do you think local that one? Yep. Okay. How do you think local arts groups can deal with the current political climate?
I wish I had a quick and easy answer for that. And unfortunately, this is something that we keep hearing, unprecedented times, but the problem is it really is unprecedented. So when it's unprecedented, we just don't know, right? This has never happened. So it's just really hard. And especially for those of us who are, Bay Area, we're getting kind of a double whammy of a lot of stuff happening at a federal level. Well, also our local economy is really not doing well. And the city has also, even prior to the change in federal leadership, the city of San Francisco, the city of Oakland has already been cutting a lot of arts funding. because they're also dealing with a lot of financial issues. So what we hope is going to happen is we hope that people who have money, like foundations and just rich people, are like, hey, here's money, right? We really hope that's going to happen. We've been seeing some of that happening. I hope it happens a little more, but there's no guarantee. So I think, definitely collective voice is a great thing. I think there's right now a lot of different advocacy groups that have been asking folks to sign petitions and things to try to keep arts at a state level. And then I also think that, reaching out to local funders and, collectively too, or individually, and just letting them know how this is affecting the art sector, and building awareness around it is helpful. But yeah, I think a lot of it is unknown at this point. Unfortunately, this has not been a great year to be in the grants profession. I'll just tell y'all that much. It's been really challenging, and I think that or might not have the most positive second half of the year either on this front, unfortunately. Yeah.
I just wanted to add a little bit to that.
Okay.
And I would, you can respond because I don't even know if this is really true, but I'm wondering if we're going to see some of the arts funding actually come through RFPs in other government agencies. So the way that we saw California Small Business Association earmark that payroll fund
Yes.
money, and I've seen other RFPs kind of, requests for proposal, which is another word for a grant proposal, coming through other agencies other than arts specific agencies within our city, county, state.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean the port did that, right? The port put out art grants, because they're like, we got all this money, we don't know what to do with it.
Or like environmental,
Yes.
funding for the city of San Francisco has a call and it's for cultural
Yes.
significance. So it's like, I feel like we're going to feel the arts coming through in different ways and different
Yeah.
paths.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, you guys know that meme. There's like the girl with like all black and serious, and then the girl with like the rainbow hair, and they're like actually sisters, right? I'm always like the girl that's in black. Like, I am the pessimist. Crystal is our optimist. So I'm like, okay, like I'm trying not to be super like Debbie Downer here, but like I do want to like have folks be aware that grant opportunities that are out there will likely be more competitive for sure in the short run. And I don't know for how long, because there just is disappearing funding streams. And when that happens and you have the same number of artists trying to get funding and there's fewer opportunities, and the opportunities that are available have fewer dollars, they do become more competitive, and you're just quite frankly less likely to get grant funding, right? And I think that we do need to acknowledge that, because we're planning, right? And when we're planning, we need to plan, like if I'm making my budget of whether or not I can pay rent, and I'm a waitress and I rely on tips to pay my rent, and I know that there's like a big storm and nobody's coming to my restaurant tonight, like I got to be real about that. Like I might need to make another plan of how I'm going to pay rent, right? Especially if that storm's going to stick in town for a week, right? Or a month, right? Like we do need to be realistic about how we're going to pay for things, and that grants are going to be a little more challenging right now. So definitely like look for opportunities that are outside the regular funding streams. And then, I think also collectively, we can build awareness of like just how much the creative economy contributes. And like, as we saw, like, I'm sure a lot of you saw like the Swain Family Foundation Cultural Forward, right? We're going to see that. And that is an example. I think that's a family foundation that is a little different. That's a little more like individual giving, which Crystal's going to talk about. And that's really what, as like a sector as a whole of like fund development, like all the ways that our nonprofit work can be funded, like we're really looking for just people who have enough money to share. Like that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for some of these local people who are billionaires or multimillionaires to just give a little more, right? And that can happen through foundations, like family foundations and things. And it can happen through just individual people writing a check from their individual bank account. And Crystal's going to talk more about that. What is it, like in a week or two? June 3rd. Okay. And that is also, I feel like you're going to have to ramp up some of that, you know, to kind of supplement some of the grant work. And then just, yeah, also get on a lot of email lists. Sometimes it's helpful to have a specific email that you use to sign up, not your throwaway email, not your Hotmail, right? But like maybe you just have like, you know, melodiesgrants@gmail.com that you create, and you just put that in all of those funders, you know, newsletters. And then when you're ready to do grant work, you can open up that email account and just go through all of the opportunities. Like maybe you set some time, you know, before I became a grant professional, when I did grant work, I would go to my favorite cafe and order my favorite latte, and I would sit down for that hour or two, and I would do my grant work, and I'd be like, this is like my treat time, right? And I get my little, you know, my little sugar bun, right? And I'd have it be a pleasurable experience, because grants, I mean, like the fact that you guys are doing this at 8:30, like grants are boring. Okay. Like I get that. They're hard work and they're boring and they're not fun. Make it a fun time. Sit down and look through the opportunities, but like get out there and like find them, right? And like get on the email list, keep your ear to the ground. The other thing I want to mention is that another change that has happened that drives me crazy to no end is we used to get like 3 months, 6 months notice that a grant was going to come out, right? Do you remember those days? Now it's like 2 weeks, you know, grant's open, you know, and like it's open and it's due. It's a brand new grant and you got to do it all from scratch, right? So there is this like shorter and shorter timelines, I feel like. So that's why you need to kind of like pay attention to when folks say, hey, we're gonna release a grant, because when they do, it's like a 2-week period that it's due. So you have to be kind of ready. Again, all that language ready and everything, so that when it's released, you're like ready to go. Yeah. All right. I know we're like at time.
Oh, I just want the last thing I wanted to say was that I know all of you have heard me like go on and on about the Common Application for the arts, but the Common App is like the baby step to a boilerplate.
Yes.
So you have, you know, kind of an established mission, you have an established proposal. You could do that project by project. There's a grant, there's a general operating template as well. So you can look at your whole year of activity. So just putting that out there.
Definitely. That even if you're not going to apply, which I mean, apply for one of those, right? But if you're not even going to apply, use that as your template to build out all those things. Those questions are asking. And again, try to figure out what are they really. I think that's a good one, because it's really clear what they're asking. But also, like, you know, it can kind of be just helpful in thinking through all those things. I personally find it a little easier to start with a project grant, right? More than like an organization grant. So maybe start there. And then as you like build it up, it'll help you kind of have things in place to really tackle like a full organization one, right? Just one that project is just one little thing to focus on, and has usually more of a start and an end to it, right? Organization work is like ongoing, and like, where do I even focus this, right? All right, any more questions, or are we on this? Thank you all for sticking with. I was like, man, people are going to start leaving as soon as it gets dark, and y'all just are either too polite or too committed to walk out.
I just want to do the plug for everything else that we have. There you go. Thanks for sticking with us, everybody. Woo! Melody, amazing. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that was just like it's so vast, the world of institutional giving and grant work and all of that you're talking about. It's just I saw like the buzzwords. I'm like boilerplate, communication, and talk to your program officer. It's like, duh. I wish someone would have like drilled that home. Like, don't be shy, right? Like, actually reach out to those folks and build relationship with them. It took me years to figure that out.
Hey, Crystal,
So I hope that was helpful for you. I just wanted to also mention that we have a movement class specifically for instrumentalists and vocalists by Stacy Palenka next time. That's Tuesday, same time, 7 o'clock. If here we might use a larger space. We're kind of getting our arms around what that means for maybe getting out of a chair and out of a desk. And then the following week, June 3rd, we'll start a 3-part series on individual giving. That'll be with me the 3rd, the 10th, and the 17th. And I hope to kind of unpack those questions about the funders that are more like individuals and what those kind of grant relationships look like and what those proposals look like and relationships look like. And also cultivating on larger scales, kind of annual giving from the community and what does like a crowdsourcing, crowdfund campaign look like versus a cultivation event, and how do you fit all of this kind of together? I'll have a ton of examples and templates, and I can't wait. I'm so excited. But thank you for coming, and I hope this was helpful, and we hope to see you next time.